Hi everyone, my name is Prakriti. I work in the Melbourne office of Zendesk as an engineering manager. Today I'm here to share some of my personal experiences with imposter syndrome working in tech, and then I'll take you through a workshop that I have prepared, which might equip you with some strategies to combat imposter syndrome in your own life. That was the introduction which I had prepared for you today. It's written in my speaker notes. But as I was saying this prepared, pre-practiced introduction, in my mind, something parallel is going on. And it goes something like this. Hi, I'm Prakriti. That one is the same. I don't know why I'm doing this workshop. No one is interested in listening to my stupid stories. I'm not an expert on imposter syndrome or anything else. So who am I to come here and suggest strategies to all these really smart people? I'm wasting your time and you're all going to hate my talk. I don't know if people can identify with this kind of thought process, but please use the chat box to interact with us as we go through this workshop and let me know if anything I'm saying is relatable to you. Yesterday, I was practicing for this and I finished my final run through and I told someone, I'm done, I'm finished practicing, I'm ready, tomorrow is my talk. And I was feeling a bit nervous and they said to me, are you experiencing some ironic pre-workshop imposter syndrome? And I was like, maybe I am. Anyway, so imposter syndrome, what is it? Imposter syndrome describes somebody who feels like a fraud. So even though you are successful at what you do, you might believe that your success is undeserved. Or you might, feel like you've convinced everyone or you've deceived everyone and that you'll be exposed as an imposter. You might feel that you've deceived them into believing that you're intelligent or competent or capable. People who have imposter syndrome, they don't feel like they actually have these great attributes. They tend to diminish their achievements by attributing them to luck or to being in the right place at the right time. These are some of the essential traits of imposter syndrome, and I know that I've felt these traits through my career, and maybe some of you in this workshop have felt some of these attributes as well. I have a quote here from Carol Waberman, a psychiatrist and author, who says that most people experience, some self-doubt when they're facing new challenges. But someone who has imposter syndrome, they have this all-encompassing fear that they will be found out to not have what it takes. So people who have imposter syndrome often bend over backwards just looking for perfection. And then when they do succeed at a project, they begin to believe that all the anxiety and all the effort that they put in has paid off. And that's where they're succeeding. And that creates a negative cycle of imposter syndrome. Now, I don't know whether I have imposter syndrome or not. What I do know is when I was studying at university, I was pretty good at programming. Like, I'll admit it, I was really good at that time. But then I joined my first tech job. I was a fresh grad. And for the first 2 years that I was working in tech, I was pretty bad at it. And I'm not being an imposter. I'm not being self-effacing. Haha, our presenter said she was bad at programming. No, I was actually not doing well. And I had performance reviews which reflected that I wasn't doing well. But now I've been working in tech for 11 years. I'm an engineering manager. I've had the opportunity to work at some really great companies. I've been surrounded by capable, intelligent, very skilled, and very motivated people. Sometimes I feel like maybe I don't belong in this group. I feel like I will never be as skilled or as motivated as all these other people around me. I'm definitely not as driven as they are, and I don't achieve these amazing results that they achieve all the time. I manage 2 engineering teams right now at Zendesk, and I'm not the best programmer on these 2 engineering teams. And I know that I will never be that person. I'm a manager now, but even back when I was a software engineer, I was never the best programmer on my team. I've had a few good opportunities, but I think some of them have happened because I've been at the right place at the right time. So sometimes I question, what have I done to deserve these opportunities? This sounds very similar to what I've read and what I've heard about imposter syndrome. And I feel like this is my version of all the internet definitions of imposter syndrome that I shared with you just in the previous slides. So I always feel self-conscious. I feel self-conscious of not being the best programmer or the most technical person on my team. In my current role, a side effect of that role is that I don't really write code anymore. All my time goes into management. And so I worry that all the people on my teams, all the engineers, will think that their manager is not technical enough, or they might look down on me because I'm not actively contributing code any longer. I worry that I might lose respect in my teams. I think that being a woman makes that worse because often women get defaulted to be seen as non-technical people in our industry. It's a sad fact, but it's true that it happens very frequently. But recently I received some feedback and I wanted to share with this group some quotes from my feedback. So one engineer on my team said, she consistently has a solid grasp on the technical status of the project and offers good ideas and criticism in technical design discussions. Another engineer said, she's a very technical engineer, so we get to benefit from her skills when it comes to technical decision making. So it sounds like the fears that I was describing before, maybe they're unfounded. Clearly my team does respect my technical decision making, and they don't look down on me and they don't see me as a non-technical person, even though I'm not contributing code on a daily basis. So there's no test that I know that exists to diagnose imposter syndrome. So how do you know? How do you know whether you have imposter syndrome? Or maybe you're just not doing a good job. Like maybe you actually suck and you're not performing well. It is possible to just be performing poorly at some stage in your career. It happens to all of us. So how will you know which one it is? Well, I'm not going to answer the question now, because if I tell you, then you'll leave. And I want you to stick around for the rest of the workshop. So we will find out by the end of today's workshop how you can answer that question for yourself. I don't think I did very well at my interview at this company 6 years ago. I've been working here for 6.5 years now. But after my interview, I came back home and I told my boyfriend at the time, look, there's no way that Zendesk is going to offer me a job after this interview. I still don't know why they hired me. Sometimes I think, maybe I was just having a lucky day. But anyway, I got hired. Soon after I joined, I got the opportunity to participate at this Girl Geek dinner event in San Francisco. So you can see a photo from the event on this slide, and I'm sitting right in the middle. So I flew over to our San Francisco office, paid by Zendesk, of course. And there I was sitting on stage with, you can see these 5 really smart, capable, successful women who are more experienced than me at this point. And they were all telling their stories. And I was just so impressed by everything that these women had achieved. At the same time, I was also wondering, what am I doing here? Like, don't get me wrong, I had a great time at this event. It was so much fun. I got a chance to meet these other Zendesk women and hear their stories and talk about my experiences. But I just didn't know, what have I done to deserve sharing this platform with them? What had I done to earn this beautiful experience? I have plenty more stories like that, but I'm not going to bore you with all of my imposter syndrome stories, because I think everyone now has a good understanding today of what imposter syndrome is. You know what I'm talking about, and you know where I'm going with these stories. Ultimately, what I want to say is that over time, these feelings, of uncertainty can lead to a fear of failure in a lot of people. They say that 70% of people worldwide, it's not just in tech, have felt like an imposter at some point in their careers. These are just stock photos, by the way. These are not the people that I'm referring to. The good news that I take some comfort from is that I'm not alone. it's not just me. It's okay to feel like an imposter sometimes. Studies do suggest, though, that imposter syndrome is particularly common among high-achieving women. Studies have also demonstrated that 46% of women in tech survey respondents have agreed that overcoming imposter syndrome will make them happier and more successful. Also, it is common amongst African American, Asian American, Latina college students. Imposter feelings are, significantly negatively correlated with psychological well-being and positively correlated with depression and anxiety. And one study, this one shocked me, one study found that imposter feelings were stronger predictors of mental health, even compared to minority status stress. But I think it's not all terrible to doubt myself sometimes. I think maybe I got lucky keeping this job, but I'm going to work my butt off now that I'm here. Believing that I'm not as good as I should be, sometimes it can give me the push that I need to work harder, to go the extra mile. If I feel like I don't belong, I can dig deeper. Why do I feel that way? What makes me different from all the other people around me? I can figure out how I'm different, and I can learn to leverage that, to use it to my advantage. Often I have to remind myself, if you're here, it's because you deserve to be here. I have to tell myself that. See, I think that we have all had moments of luck and privilege in our lives. For example, maybe there was some luck in getting my current job at Zendesk. Being able to attend university, get a professional degree, that was definitely a privilege for me. I didn't do much to earn that privilege, but that doesn't detract from the work that I'm putting in today. We have all overcome invisible or visible barriers to be where we are today, to be sitting in this workshop and talking to each other. So I think it's okay to have imposter syndrome. I mean, according to the data and the studies, it seems like almost everyone has it anyway. But I don't want those feelings to be around all of the time. And that is why I designed this workshop, to help with that. So less talking from me and more exercises for you. This is the cool part of the workshop. We're going to discuss some strategies that hopefully all of you can take home and use on a daily basis to banish your imposter syndrome thoughts. We are in a bit of a restricted environment here today, being all virtual, we can't be in the same room together. So we will have to use our imagination a little bit. I hope that you will be able to relate these steps to a real world situation the next time one comes up in your lives. Let's face it, for me, a real world situation is probably going to come up like 5 minutes after I finish this workshop. So if you are anything like me, hopefully you will also get an opportunity to practice these steps very soon. You will need for this workshop just somewhere you can write a few sentences. So use your laptop or maybe a notebook or your phone, pen and paper, anything you have on hand. You'll need like maybe 1 page of paper and a pen. So what we'll do at this stage is we will take a 1-minute break, just if you need to gather any materials or open up a notebook, and then we will jump straight into the workshop. I should mention that it is 1:20 a.m. in Melbourne, so it is the middle of the night for me. If I make any mistakes in the slides or anything, I'm totally going to blame it on it being the middle of the night. And my voice is like a bit scratchy as well, because I was actually sleeping and I set an alarm and I woke up to present this, and then I'm going to go straight back to sleep after the workshop is over. All right, so I will set a timer on my phone for 1 minute, and then once that is over, we will kickstart the workshop with our first step. Okay, so use this minute to gather any materials that you might need. Okay, I don't know if you heard that, but that was my timer going off. So let's get started. Now, as we go through the workshop, I will have some questions for you. Please use the chat box to answer the questions so that we can learn from each other and see how we are progressing. In real life, I would be on a stage, and as we went through every step, I would come down from the stage and walk around the tables and be able to ask you questions. So instead of that, we will try and use the chat box today. I'll also give you an opportunity to unmute yourself and share your thoughts with the group. So if you would like to do that, please turn on your camera or switch off your microphone and go ahead and share with the rest of the group. Let's get started. So this is what you do when imposter syndrome strikes. You react. REACT. This is an easy acronym that I have prepared to help you to remember the 5 steps that we are going to discuss today so that you can do them anywhere, anytime. What we'll do is go through each of the 5 steps one at a time, and I'll give you all some time at every step so we can practice all the steps together. And then at the end, all you have to do is remember the word react, and hopefully that will help you to remember all the steps. So let's break it down and start with step 1. The R in react is to record successful outcomes and feedback. Does anyone here do this thing in performance reviews when you're just like half listening to your manager who's talking about your accomplishments and saying good things about you, but the second half of your brain is just in panic mode? You're trying to remember all the ways in which you screwed up in the last 6 months. I see some people nodding. I'm glad you can relate because this is totally what I do all the time. I just wait for my manager to get through all the good stuff quickly because in my head, I'm just dreading all the bad things which are going to follow. And I'm convinced that the bad things will always follow the good things. So if you can relate to that, let me know in the chat box. Well, anyway, I'm here to tell you, stop doing that in your performance reviews. All feedback is important, and all feedback deserves to be treated well and given time, even positive feedback. So this first step today is about recording successful outcomes and positive feedback when it is received. I find that I receive many forms of qualitative, quantitative feedback outside of dedicated one-on-ones and performance reviews, Like sometimes I didn't even recognize that it was feedback because maybe it wasn't delivered in a specific way. I mean, I expect that when I'm going into a one-on-one, I will get feedback from my manager. And I expect that when we're doing 360 reviews or whatever you call it at your company, I will get feedback from my peers. But that doesn't have to be my only source of positive feedback. I feel like feedback has become such a loaded word. It's such a heavy word nowadays. But any comment on your output or your behavior at work, potentially it can be a great source of feedback. So instead of listening and immediately forgetting, which is what I do, try to record things as they happen. Don't just record verbal or written positive feedback which people give you, because we don't always work in wonderful environments where we receive lots of positive reinforcement. You need to observe for yourself successful outcomes. So examples of what could be a successful outcome, it could be a piece of code that is really well written. It could be a positive customer experience, or it could be where you were able to resolve a problem for somebody and you got a good comment. Maybe it could be like a sales deal, or it could be a marketing launch. You may not get official feedback on any of these outcomes from anybody, but you should note these outcomes down. They were only possible because you worked hard for them. So how do you write this stuff down? It's not anything extreme, I'm not saying walk around with a notebook all the time and stop mid-conversation and start writing in your notebook. What I do is often I will just maintain notes on my phone, simply because I have my phone on me all the time. I think if I'm away from my phone for like 10 minutes, then something disastrous will happen. So my phone never leaves my side. After a quick conversation, if I get a second to myself, I might edit a note on my phone and I might add a summary of the conversation. If I'm going into a one-on-one or a longer conversation, then I know that I might forget some of the points that are being discussed. So usually I will just say something upfront, I'll say something like, I'm not great at remembering. Your feedback is really important to me, and I don't want to forget any of it. So do you mind if I take some notes as we chat? And this works really well. No one has ever declined my request. And no one's ever been like surprised or taken aback, like, why is she saying this? So I'll give you some examples. What kinds of things should you record? Some things that I recorded lately for myself. Preparing my second fully virtual workshop. That's this one. It's my second time delivering a workshop, in pandemic times that has to be done completely virtually. But it is my first time doing it at 1:30 in the morning. So I wrote this down because, I feel like no matter how this goes, whether it's successful or it's not successful, I think it's still a good outcome that I did it because I prepared it. I worked hard on the content. I challenged myself to deliver a workshop remotely from thousands of kilometers away from all of you in the middle of Saturday night for me. Some other outcomes that I noted recently, I delivered successfully a very complex and long-running project with my teams. Working, across multiple teams, multiple time zones is quite challenging. I'm sure that that's something that many of us have done. Also, adapting to being a remote manager during a pandemic, that was nuts. We never thought we would have to do something like that. Now, these examples, obviously, they're very specific to like manager kind of roles because that's what I do. So these are my successful outcomes. But when you're taking notes in this step, your successful outcomes and good feedback, it'll look completely different from mine because it's going to depend on your role and what you do for work every day. But those are just some examples from, my last few months, very dependent on my role and what I do. So remember how I said we'll have to use our imaginations a little bit today to practice this step in a constrained environment. So what we're going to do is try to recall events that have happened in your recent past. Now, in real life, I recommend that you should do this step as events unfold because I feel like our version of what happened can change even one day later. If I'm having a really bad day, sometimes I will rewrite the story of what actually happened in my head, and I will make it more negative than the reality. So I think that writing it down as soon as possible, it ensures that I get the correct information without overthinking too much. So let's try to do this step today. Try to recall a recent successful outcome that you have achieved, or try to recall a recent piece of positive feedback, maybe that you might have received, and write it down on the materials that you have in front of you. And if you're interested in sharing, then please also write your example in the chat box so that we can all get inspired from each other's ideas. So we're going to take 2 minutes to do this step. I will set a timer on my phone again. And when the 2 minutes are up, then we'll come back together, we'll share some of our examples, and then we'll move on to the next step. So we'll start the 2 minutes now. Okay, that was my timer. We have one example here about building a doc for a new member, and boss was really happy. That sounds great. Can't think of anything, but still a student. Yeah, that's definitely more challenging situation. People don't really give feedback to students very often, which can make it quite difficult. And you need to like observe for yourself, what you're doing well. I love writing, always wanted to have a blog. So I launched a site. Oh my God, that is so exciting. Congratulations. That's big news. Okay, these are all great examples. Let's keep going. Step 2. So in step 2, you evaluate your imposter thoughts and question implicit assumptions. When a thought arises in your mind that makes you feel like an imposter, write it down. And then write down the immediate negative thought that you had and what was the chain of thoughts that you followed that made you feel like an imposter. You'll notice a common theme in this workshop. I like to write things down. I feel like it really clarifies ideas in my head when I write them down. So I'll give you an example. A recent imposter thought that I had was, I'm letting my team down and I'm letting everyone around me down. So I would start by writing this down. I'm letting everyone down. And then I would think, what led me down this path? What was the incident that happened? What immediate negative thoughts did my brain react with during the incident? What was the chain of thoughts that followed my initial reaction? And then how did I conclude at the end that I was letting everyone down? So let's do that with my example. I was in a one-on-one with my manager. He shared some feedback with me, around an area that I should improve on. I agreed with him and I said, look, yes, I understand I'm not doing this particular thing super well and I need to improve. I need to get better at this area. I decided that I would work on it. But it was still an emotional conversation. No one likes to hear about the things that they're not doing well. So I was feeling a bit vulnerable after this meeting. And then I came out and I went straight into another meeting, back to back. In my second meeting, I had to explain a project to someone. I felt like this person was behaving very immaturely. They were not hearing me, not listening to what I was trying to convey, not interested. To put it simply, I felt like they were just being a spoiled brat. That made me think that I'm not doing a good job of representing this project that I'm campaigning for. And I followed that path down in my head and I concluded I'm letting my team down. So once you have written all your negative thoughts, try to capture how did that make you feel. In my example, I had feelings of reduced worth. I felt frustrated. I felt like no one is listening to me. No one understood me. And I felt very unheard that day. This sounds tough, and it is tough. It's difficult, to examine your negative thoughts, examine how they're making you feel, but it is an essential part of this step. That was the tough part. It's done. You have successfully evaluated your negative thoughts. Now it's time to question the implicit assumptions that are hiding in those negative thoughts. So for each thought that you had leading down the chain to your imposter thought, write down, what assumptions are you making? And what evidence is this assumptions based on? Are you observing behavior and reaching logical conclusions? Or are you engaging in hyperbole and making things worse in your head? In my example, so I would question, what indication has my team given to me that I am letting them down? Was this person really behaving immaturely? Or was I just feeling emotional because I had a difficult one-on-one right before our meeting? So these are some of the assumptions that I made. So in your notes, you will highlight similarly the assumptions that you have made in your journey to your imposter thought. I'll give you another example of an imposter thought that I'm having right now, which is that, I'm saying all this and I'm giving you all these steps, but in my head, I'm thinking, oh my God, they're not getting it. No one is buying these steps. They don't make sense. You will think I'm stupid and no one is actually listening to me. I can't even see you all. This is all virtual. I can see some cameras. I can't see some videos. And, I feel like no one is listening. But that's so many assumptions. Oh my God, I just made so many assumptions, right? Maybe by the end of this workshop, maybe you might not like it. You might think it wasn't very useful. But right now, we're only half an hour in. I'm sure at least some of you are listening. Maybe even more than one person. Maybe two people are still listening. But these are all the assumptions that I'm making in my head. Hey, good, people are saying that they're listening. Excellent. But we make these assumptions all the time, I think. So that's how we would practice this particular step. Now, in real life, I recommend that you do this step as soon as possible after you get the imposter thought in your head. But for now, to practice, try to remember a recent imposter thought that you might have had, maybe, in the last 1 month or so, and write it down. And then, just like I did in my example, write down all the negative thoughts, the whole chain from beginning to ending in your imposter thought, and then highlight the assumptions that you have made in this chain. So like my assumptions were that, no one in my team told me that I'm letting them down. And I assumed that this person was just being a spoiled brat and that they were not listening to me. And, I assumed that because your videos are off, that you're not actually watching this workshop and maybe you're just playing games on your phone. So try and write down all these assumptions that you're making in your head as well. We'll take 2 minutes again on the timer to practice this step. And when we hear the timer buzz, then please write in the chat box some of the assumptions and the imposter thoughts that came up in your head. Let's start now. Okay, that was time up. Let's continue on. I was just reading the examples in the chat. There's some really good stories here. I wanted to call out what Camilla said. A decision was made in my company that was directly impacting your job, but you were not a part of the conversation. This is such a coincidence because this exact thing happened with me last week as well. Some people at my company made a decision involving someone who reports to me, and I was not consulted in that decision-making process. And I felt exactly like you have said, which is that, like, obviously my opinion is not valuable. I felt so hurt and disrespected that, no one cares what I feel about this decision. And like, why am I even here? Like, if you're not even going to consult me before making a decision about someone who actually reports to me, then why have you even put me in this job? But, well, I actually had a conversation with them about that later, and it turns out that was just not the case. It was, just different factors. There were some things that they could not reveal to me because of HR reasons, and they had to make a decision in a time frame of only 2 days, and that's why they didn't involve me. But I jumped to the same conclusions and I made the same assumptions. So it's really comforting to know that other people feel the same way. Thank you for sharing your examples, everyone. Okay, step 3. So step 3 is to ask trusted people for their opinions. This is an optional step. It is more suitable to some situations than others. So, use it if you feel like it will help in that particular example that you're handling on that day. Sometimes I feel like I can get very trapped and tangled up in my own negative thoughts. I don't know, do other people feel that way? Is that something you can relate to? I think that it can be useful for me to expand what I believe to be true about myself by seeking opinions from the people who I trust. The key word here is people you trust. So people who you know will be honest with you, people who have enough context about you to be able to form correct, informed opinions about you. So you can look outside yourself and you can ask your trusted family or your friends or your colleagues for their opinions on the negative thoughts that you identified in the previous step. I believe that sometimes we just need someone who we trust to tell us the things that we already know about ourselves so that we can believe them. Sometimes I need to hear an opinion from somebody else. I might already know this, but it really sinks in if I hear it from someone I trust. So once you've collected that information, just add it to your notes along with the other data that you collected in step 1. This is one more data point for you to add to your notes. So let's continue the previous example that I was telling you, which is I felt like I was letting everyone down. I confided in a colleague who I really trusted. I told him this whole story in full detail. And I said to him, I feel like I'm letting my team down and I feel like I'm not doing a good job here anymore. And he said to me, you're able to have off days and days when you'd rather not be here. But remember that every other day you're doing a really stellar job. You haven't gotten to where you are today because you're lazy. You got here because you deserve it and you worked really hard. That's so nice. I feel so good even now every time I read that quote. I feel like that was a good point to add to my notes because it's coming from a work colleague and a friend who knows me. He has context on my job and I can trust him to be honest with me. So that's what this step is all about. Of course, now you probably don't have somebody in this workshop who fits that category, who you can ask right now. So to practice this step, try to recall a recent time, maybe in the last 1 month, when someone who you trust shared a positive opinion or a positive fact about you. And then similarly, try to recall a negative opinion or a negative fact that someone you trust shared with you. And write that down in your materials along with the other data that you collected in step number 1. So let's take 2 minutes to try and recall that. I know this can be quite hard because we're relying on memory, but in real life, you don't have to rely on memory. You can just go and ask these people who you trust. But give it a try, starting now. And share with us as well in chat if you can recall anything. Okay, that was 2 minutes. Not a lot of examples for this one in the chat box. So let me ask you before we move on to the next step, was it difficult to recall some positive examples that someone shared with you? And did you find it easier to recall negative examples as compared to positive examples? That's just something for you to reflect on. Why did you think it was easier to recall negative examples? And do you think that these steps will help you to change that going forward? I can see some good examples coming in now. Always giving nice feedback. That's great. Often silent in meetings and someone publicly complimented your involvement. That is so good. Negative example, really bad at managing your time. That's a very common one that comes up. And then the mentor said, need to improve communication with directors. These are really good examples. Thank you for sharing, everyone. Okay, step 4. So challenge assumptions with data from your notes. So far in this workshop, we have been just collecting information, right? We've been on a data gathering exercise. We've collected information about outcomes, about feedback, negative thoughts, assumptions, opinions from trusted people. Now this step, number 4, is where we look at all of our notes and we try to separate the imposter syndrome thoughts from legitimate feedback and concerns. I try to be careful. I don't want to swing towards either extreme. So I don't want to think that all my negative thoughts are accurate, because that would just be horrible. But I also don't want to dismiss all my negative thoughts as, oh, it's just imposter syndrome. Because there could be some excellent pieces of good feedback hiding among those thoughts. And that can make me, better at my job. It can make me a better person. But obviously the challenge is it's very hard to tell which is imposter syndrome and which is like good feedback. So this step will help us to do that. How do you do it? So reflect on all the notes that you have written down so far. So the data that you collected in step 1, the data you collected in optional step 3 by talking to trusted people, put all that data on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side, put all the negative thoughts from step 2 that you wrote down. And then reflect on this. What does the data suggest when you put it next to the negative thoughts? Does the data that you have collected support or contradict your negative thoughts? So on the left-hand side, if you can find data here that supports the thought, then this could be a valid concern. It could be a valid piece of feedback. However, if you can't find any data on the left-hand side that supports the negative thought on the right-hand side, then it's simply not accurate. It is probably a symptom of imposter syndrome. Or if you find data on the left that is actually the opposite, it is negating your imposter thought on the right, then it is also probably just a symptom of imposter syndrome. So let me explain with my example. So on the left-hand side, I would put all the data which I have collected. So, recent performance reviews, team feedback, the opinion of my trusted colleague, which I shared with you, that quote that he said before, and, all the successful outcomes that I've been saving in the notes on my phone. I would put all that on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side, I would put the thought of, I'm letting my team down, I'm letting everyone down. That would be the negative thought on the right-hand side. And if I look at all this and I reflect on it, then obviously I will have to categorize I'm letting my team down as an imposter thought. I have plenty of areas that I need to work on. I'm not saying that I'm a perfect manager, definitely not. But all the data that I have, it just doesn't add up to such a severe evaluation of I'm letting everyone down. The data that I've collected, it just doesn't reflect that. It doesn't match that. So it's obviously not valid feedback, and it is just a negative thought of my imposter syndrome. So today you have very little data because we only spent a few minutes, we went through every step really quickly. In real life, you'll have a lot of data to work with. The longer you do this, the more information you will collect. But for today, look at all the notes that you have written so far and feel free to include, other information that you might have about your performance. You might have some notes from your last feedback session or your last performance review or promotion or whatever. Now compare all that to the negative thoughts that you wrote down in the previous step and try to categorize each negative thought. Ask yourself, based on this data, is this an imposter thought or is this valid feedback? And remember the criteria which we're using for classification. Is there data in your notes that supports this thought? If yes, then it might be valid feedback. If there is no data in your notes that supports it, then it is probably imposter syndrome. So let's take 2 minutes to try and do this. And then in your chat box, please share, what is your conclusion? Is it categorized as imposter syndrome or is it categorized as valid feedback? So let me start the timer now. Okay, that was 2 minutes. 2 minutes goes really quickly, man. I mean, it sounds like a long time, but it's really not. Okay, final step, step 5. Transform the imposter thought and save it. Transform, get it? The GIF doesn't work so well when you're sharing online, but in real life, it looks really cool. So this last step, this is where we transform our imposter thoughts. In the previous step, you categorized, you identified some thoughts were imposter thoughts because they had no data to back them up. Now, in this step, for each of those thoughts that you identified, try to think about what can a revised version of that thought look like. If you were to rewrite it to make it more accurately reflect the data that you have collected, then how would you rewrite it? In some cases, it could be only a small modification, and suddenly your thought becomes way more accurate and it becomes true to your data. In other cases, you might find that you have to revise it and make it completely opposite to your original negative imposter thought. So in my case, if you remember my example, the thought was, I'm letting everyone down. And we went through some data and we concluded that it definitely should be categorized as an imposter thought because I'm absolutely not letting everyone down. So in this particular example, I need to now revise this thought and rewrite it to something that more accurately reflects the data that I have collected. I would love to hear from everyone here if anyone has any thoughts. How do you think I should revise the thought, I'm letting my team down? What would be a good, modification or a good transformation of this thought that would make it more accurate? Please share in the chat box. I'll wait for a minute and see if anyone wants to share any suggestions on how I can revise it. If you want, you can also unmute your microphone and just tell me verbally what you think would be a good revision. We're a pretty small group today, so don't hesitate to unmute your microphone if you like. Nobody has any suggestions on how I can revise this? I can share the one that I did. So when I did this exercise for myself, I have a suggestion from Stephanie. My team respects and appreciates how I manage them. That is so good. And it's so true because, every time I get feedback, like official feedback from my team, it's always really positive. So there is no need for me to have this imposter thought. But of course, that's not how the brain works. That's a great way to revise this. The one that I wrote in my notes here is my team is delivering fine, but I have received some good feedback and now I can help them be even more productive. So isn't this like so different? My original thought was I'm letting everyone down. And my revised thought was my team is delivering well and now I have some suggestions and I can make them even more productive. It is such a far away departure from my original imposter thought. Remember that your revised thought in this step, it should match with the data that you have collected in the previous steps. If you don't have enough data about that topic to actually revise it, then just remove it for now. You can always come back to it later once you've had the opportunity to collect more relevant data about that particular topic. So let's try to practice this final step now and see how we go. Go through, in your previous step, you categorize some thoughts as imposter thoughts. Go through those and try to, rewrite it and write down a revised version of that imposter thought, which is more representative of the data that you have collected in your notes. And then please share in the chat box, share the original imposter thought and the revised version. I'm really keen to see how other people revise their thoughts, if you compare before and after. And then maybe I can learn some new tips as well from your experiences. So let's take 2 minutes to try and revise our thoughts now. And then we'll come back and discuss some of them. I'll give you an opportunity to unmute yourself and share with the group as well if you would like to share your before and after versions. Okay, let's do that. Okay, time is up. So would anybody like to share maybe an example of your before and after thought? I just shared another one that I had right now. I can see some good examples coming in. Felt like your opinion was not worthy, no one would like to hear. But at the end, we were chatting and they all agreed with one thing I shared. That's so nice. That's so validating to hear that. Before being excluded of decisions, after, because I'm the only tech person on the team, people don't really know what are my capabilities. If I put some effort to improve talking about it, I'm sure they will be more open. That sounds excellent. Good actions. I often feel like because I'm a girl in a masculine job, it will be difficult for me to find my place. But it was the opposite. Wow, that's really good to hear. I'm so happy for you. Okay, some really good examples there. Thank you for sharing. So let's recap the 5 steps and just revise what we did in the workshop today. So REACT is the acronym that you need to remember, and you can take a screenshot of this screen and save it, and that will just give you a very quick way to sort of remember the 5 steps. So step 1, record successful outcomes and feedback. Do this as it happens and observe it for yourself, because you might not always get the feedback on your good outcomes. Step 2, evaluate negative imposter thoughts. Remember to think about the whole chain of thoughts. How did it make you feel? And question the implicit assumptions that are hiding in those thoughts. Step 3, optional step, ask trusted people for their opinion on the topic if you feel like it will help you. Step 4, challenge assumptions with data. So on the left, put all your data. On the right, put your negative thoughts, and then try to see what makes sense. Categorize it, imposter thought, not imposter thought. And then finally, step 5, transform all the imposter thoughts that you identified in the previous step. So this, it seems like, it's a lot to take in right now, because we went through it slowly and I did lots of rambling and gave you lots of examples. But when you're doing this as an exercise by yourself, hopefully it won't take more than 5 minutes for your particular example. The more frequently you do it, the more of your common repeating imposter thoughts get revised into more accurate reality versions. So the more you do it, the less you have to do it going forward. And that's the kind of homework that I like to do. I want to do homework that is going to reduce further homework that I need to do in the future. And that's why these steps have been designed in this way. So the next time the same imposter thought comes up again, you can just, skip all the steps and directly go to your revised version, and you don't have to repeat the whole exercise every time. So those were all the steps that I wanted to share with you today. And I really appreciate everyone sharing the examples in chat box as well. Some of these are very inspiring to me, and I can relate to some of these stories as well. What we'll do now is we can take some questions. So if you like, you are welcome to type your question in the chat box and I will read it and answer it. Or if you want, you can unmute your microphone and just ask the question. And I'm happy to do that as well. And then also finally, if you don't want to ask your question publicly right now in front of everyone, then you can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn. My Twitter handle is on the screen, and just search for my name on LinkedIn, and it's a pretty unique name, so I think you'll be able to find me. And then I'm happy if you want to get in touch with me after the workshop as well. So I'll just pause and stop talking for a few minutes, and then feel free to unmute and ask any questions you might have. Okay, I have a question here in the chat box. How long does it take for you to get back to a healthy state after starting with imposter syndrome? Great question. I feel like for me, I think this is an ongoing thing, I feel like it's never going to be, now I have imposter syndrome and now it's fixed and I no longer have imposter syndrome. I think it's going to be something that I just need to manage. Maybe for my entire career, possibly. I don't know, it's hard to say, right? But right now, I feel like it's something I need to manage continuously. I think I have waves. So it comes and goes in waves. Like I have times when I'm feeling really good about my performance and I don't feel anything and I don't need to do these steps for a few months. And then I might have a wave that goes down and I'm feeling really badly about my performance. And when I'm feeling bad, then I perceive everything that's happening in a very negative lens. And then I need to do these steps more frequently. So I think there is no healthy state or like stopping point for me. I feel like it comes and goes, and I just want to have these steps in my back pocket so I can use them whenever I need to. How do you catch and stop yourself in the middle of spiraling negative thoughts? That is such a hard question. I feel like I need a professional therapist to come and answer this question for me, because I don't know. What I personally try to do is I just kind of let it go. I feel like when I'm in the flow and I'm having a lot of negative thoughts, then I'm just not going to listen to any sort of logic or reason. So I feel like I just, indulge myself for a couple of days. I'm like, fine, just have all the negative thoughts you want to have. And then once it's done, then I tell myself we're going to be reasonable and we're going to be positive and we're going to figure it out. So once I'm finished with like spiraling with all my negative thoughts, then I will try and practice these steps. I will write everything down. I'll analyze it based on some data and, I'll see how I feel. Next question. How can I help someone if I see that they have imposter syndrome thoughts? This is very tricky. So I think it depends on your relationship with this person. If you are a professional manager, for example, so like if someone who reports to me, I can see that they're having a lot of imposter syndrome thoughts, then as their manager, as part of the coaching and career development, I treat this as any other problem area where they require coaching. And I, work on a coaching plan with them, and I work on a development plan, and I help them to provide them with resources and maybe these steps, and we discuss it in one-on-ones. It's easy to do it if you're the professional manager because they already see you as a coach and as a mentor. But if it's a peer-to-peer relationship, if it's someone in your team, then it can be very tricky. And I think I would step very carefully in that situation because I don't want to overstep my boundaries and say something that might offend them. So in that situation, maybe I would try to approach their manager and I would say, hey, just want to check in with you. I noticed that this friend or this colleague of mine, they're performing really well. I don't know why they're having all these imposter thoughts. Can we have a conversation about that? And so maybe I would try to do a very careful communication around that. And if it's just your friend, and if you have a very strong relationship with that person, then I feel that I can feel comfortable going to them directly and giving them lots of positive feedback specifically in that area where they're feeling like an imposter. I would give them lots of positive feedback with very concrete data and examples. So they will have to believe that feedback, right? Because you'll give them lots of data and you'll give them lots of real world stories. And that will slowly help them to realize that their performance is actually good. So again, depends on what relationship you have with this person. How to present negative feedback, not to trigger imposter syndrome thoughts. Excellent question. I would say whenever I'm presenting negative feedback, and I have to do this a lot because I'm a manager, right? So you have to have difficult conversations with people. I always try to use a framework for presenting that feedback. And the framework is always based on real world examples. So I will always start with a description of the incident that happened, the situation that happened, and then I will describe the impact of that situation, either on myself or on whoever that impact was felt. So for example, the situation could be that when we were pairing yesterday, I gave you this suggestion. I said that we should refactor the code using the command pattern, whatever, something. And you dismissed it very quickly and you started writing this other pattern. And that made me feel like my opinion is not valuable, or it made me feel like I'm not a good engineer. So describe the situation and then describe the impact. And this way, you're not saying to them, you're a bad engineer, and you're not triggering all their negative imposter thoughts. You're saying to them that in this very specific situation, you took this very specific action, and this is how I felt as a result of your action, or this is the impact that it had on me. And so what this does is it makes a very tight scope of your feedback, and you're not attacking the whole person. You're just giving them a very tight scope. And then I like to follow it up with, why am I giving this feedback? So I'm sharing this because I would like us to have a really good pairing experience going forward. So I'm not attacking you, and I'm not sharing this feedback because I hate you and you're a bad software engineer. I'm sharing this feedback for this particular purpose, and here is what happened, and here is the impact. So you don't have to use exactly like this framework. You can Google this. There are lots of great frameworks, but I think sticking to a good framework and giving very tightly scoped feedback is a good way to avoid them feeling very negative about what you're saying. Any tips to take feedback not too close to heart and not personal at work? I'm laughing because I do this all the time. I take everything really close to heart and very personally, and I'm always like, after any meeting where I get negative feedback, I'm like, oh, I suck at everything. I'm so bad at my job. So I would say that, it's okay to feel that way. And as soon as you come out, as soon as someone's giving you negative feedback, your initial reactions might be really bad, and you might feel horrible, and you might be like, I hate you, and I hate myself, and I hate my job, and I hate everything. That's okay. What I do is I just sit with that for some time. The important thing is to keep my mouth shut and not say anything, because I'm feeling really bad. And I'm obviously, if I say something right now, it's just going to be just bad things. I'm not going to say anything useful, and I'm not going to do anything useful. So I just sit with those feelings for some time. And when a little bit of time passes and it's not so fresh, then I feel like I calm down a little bit. And then I can look at the feedback a little objectively. I can step back from the situation and look at the feedback, and I can remind myself, like when I'm giving feedback is the same thing, right? I can remind myself that this feedback is scoped to a particular thing that happened. Like I did something that made this person feel something. And it's not a reflection of my whole personality or my whole nature. It's only a reflection of one incident that happened. So the feedback is not about me. It's about one action which I did. And if I just understand that, then, I can be different next time. I can do this action differently. And also important to remember, sometimes it's just not good feedback, man. Not everyone's good at giving feedback. Sometimes the other person is just being a jerk and just saying something really mean. So be careful about that as well. It's not, I know that people, your bosses always like to say things like, oh, you should listen to all feedback and you should always like work harder. And yes, you should work on yourself and you should listen to feedback. But every now and then you will get some really shitty feedback. And it's important to not let that really shitty feedback make you feel really horrible about yourself. So if you're not sure, use these steps and they will help you identify whether it's like good feedback or it's just some bullshit, man. I think we need to change our views on negative feedback and not view them as failures, because it is just an opportunity to get better. That's true. I think it's very logical what you're saying. It's just hard, right? Because we get very emotional when people say bad things about us. Some people get very emotional. I definitely get emotional. So I think, like I said, stepping back from the situation. How do you select a person for trusted opinion in the third step? So I have some criteria. I think for me, one criteria is that they should have context, because context is everything, right? The same behavior in different contexts can be good or bad. So if they have context around that situation, only then can they give me an informed opinion. So do they have enough context to give you an informed opinion? So the kind of people I trust is like, if it's a colleague, then it should be somebody who has context of what's going on in my role and they should understand it. If it's a friend, then they should have context on what kind of friend I am. They should have been friends with me long enough to have developed like a lot of information about me, to have developed a lot of context over time. Another criteria is, can they be honest but kind? So do they have the skill of being honest with you in a kind way? A lot of people use honesty as a way to just say really hurtful things to you. That's not honesty. That's not helpful to you. So can they be honest while still being empathetic and kind to you? And then try to think about another criteria. Maybe it could be, if the role was reversed, would you be a trusted person for them? Would they also select you as a trusted person? That can be a good check as well. So, there's no I wish I could give you like a formula to come up with a trusted person, but that doesn't exist. These are some of the criteria which I try to use when I'm selecting somebody. Okay, I think there are no more questions. So I'm happy to stop here if there are no other questions. I would like to thank you all for participating. It was really great to see so much engagement. All of the great questions that you asked, that really, made me feel like everyone was actually listening to the workshop and having a good time. So thank you very much. Connect with me afterwards on Twitter or LinkedIn if you would like to ask me more questions. And it is now 2:18 a.m. So I'm going to go straight to bed. And the rest of you have a great time with the rest of this conference.